Sì, ora si vede. Sì,
Mi
sì,
vedi?
sì, sì,
Ok.
perfetto.
Va bene. Ma poi mi dici
Sì, sì,
tu...
adesso sì, aspettiamo 2 minuti fino alle 4 e qualcosa, dai.
Sì. Ma mi era venuta un'idea su il nostro quel paper uscito ieri, no?
Mhm.
Che il tema è interessante, anche un po' d'attualità così. Si poteva magari proporre a qualche giornale internazionale di fare una specie di op-ed tratto adesso che è stato pubblicato.
Non sarebbe male, lì sarebbe bello su Communication of ACM, però ti ricordi ci hanno
Mm.
detto che volevano
Mhm.
più
Sì, no, pensavo proprio a un tipo quotidiano, non so, il Guardian, non so, propogliere.
non so.
Beh, tanto proporre non costa niente, si fa una mail dicendo abbiamo pubblicato, cioè no, prima di pubblicarlo ovviamente era stato possibile, adesso però è uscito pubblicato su una rivista scientifica, quindi vogliamo fare una versione
Mhm.
più divulgativa,
Se conosci qualcuno per me va bene.
si può mandare una mail, vediamo. Magari dicono no, non ci interessa, non ci costa niente fare una...
Sì, no, tanto si fa presto, nel senso
Mm.
si dirà al limite non ti rispondono o ti rispondono e ti dicono sì o no.
Sì,
Non fa
mhm.
niente. Proviamo, tanto
C'è
stiamo
un
lì.
tentativo, sì. Sì, mi viene in mente tra quelli più importanti il Guardian, forse il più accessibile, insomma. Poi
Penso che
online.
forse è anche quello che è un po' più probabile, perché gli altri sono un po'...
No, gli altri più che altro c'è molta concorrenza, insomma. Cioè, vuol dire, uno può anche mandare una mail al New York Times, però che sia un po' più difficile, insomma.
Cioè, New Yorker forse.
Ma lì però hanno proprio articoli lunghi, quindi
Però...
deve piacergli molto il tema, insomma, cosa... mentre questi, soprattutto il Guardian che è online, ha un sacco di articoli di approfondimento di vario tipo, insomma. Però girano parecchio poi, quindi...
Proviamo, tanto al limite è
Tanto-
meglio se fa presto.
Sì, sì, no, poi vogliamo andare in mail, cioè, visto che comunque è pubblicato su una rivista insomma, significativa dal punto di vista
Sì, sì.
della comunità scientifica, un
Però
tentativo.
anche senza revisioni, quindi alla fine...
Vabbè, vabbè, quello quantomeno. Sì. Ok, lì è pomeriggio tardi, no?
Qui sono le 4, adesso sono le
Mhm.
4.
Ok.
Okay, I think we can start. So we are on time. So welcome back to our series of webinars on digital economy and artificial systems. This is, I believe, the 11th and final meeting for the year. And today we are, again, very honored to have a distinguished guest, Professor Andrea Lavazza, who joins us from, I believe, Milan. Hello, Andrea.
Hello.
Good to see you. Okay, before I leave the stage to Andrea, let me briefly introduce him for those of you who don't know him. So Andrea is my good friend, old-time collaborator, long-term collaborator. He currently serves as a professor of philosophy at Pegaso University in Italy. He is also senior research fellow at Centro Universitario Internazionale, also in Italy, and vice director of Avvenire, which is an Italian newspaper. His research focuses on ethics of new technologies, including neuroscience, neurotechnologies, and artificial intelligence. Andrea is also interested in the impact of novel devices on humans and the moral status of new entities, such as biological and brain organoids and non-biological as in digital agents. Professor Lavazza has also explored the fate of free will and certain human functions such as memory in the technological age. And he published, I think, 15 books and more than 180 papers, both as first and co-author. Today, Professor Lavazza will give us a short lecture, I believe 30 minutes or so, on ethical issues surrounding AI. In particular, specifically, as you can see from the title of the first, or the talk, of the slides, which is on the screen, he will be talking about transparency, fairness, and responsibility in the context of generative AI. after the talk. As always, we will have a small chance to ask him a few questions. I think 5 to 10 minutes, 2-3 questions, no more, because Andrea has a important commitment after this talk. And well, I hope the audience today will be able to take advantage of this opportunity. Okay, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Andrea. Professor Lavazza, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind invitation and for your presentation. I'm very grateful to Professor Farina and to Mirko for this chance to be with you today, even though only remotely, obviously. So again, good afternoon, and I hope you can see my slides now in the
yes,
presentation mode. And so, as you can see, my aim in the next half an hour is defining some key points in the ethics of generative AI, as the title clearly indicates. We know that, in general, ethical considerations surrounding generative artificial intelligence have become increasingly significant as these technologies evolve and integrate into various domains of our life. So in general, generative AI refers to systems capable of creating new content, such as text, images, music, and even complex decision-making processes, often indistinguishable from those produced by humans. This is a very relevant feature of these systems. While generative AI offers potential for innovation, big potential, for creativity and efficiency, it also raises very significant ethical questions. And these concerns include issues of authorship, intellectual property, the potential for bias and discrimination in content generated by AI. So we have also consequences on employment, and also some risk of misinformation and even manipulation. Additionally, we can state that the broader societal implication of AI systems which are capable of autonomous decision demand rigorous scrutiny and ethical oversight. In general, we can say that generative AI continues to shape our digital landscape, and in this sense, it is essential to examine the moral framework that should guide the development of these systems. So, given the goal of simplicity and time restriction, as Professor Farina said before, I'll be focusing only on 3 well-known principles. However, I'll try to discuss them in a less classical way, also considering some counter-arguments on their applicability. So let's see them in turn. As for transparency, we know that we have this classical definition, which is the clarity and openness with which the system, its processes, and its outputs can be understood by users and stakeholders. So this is an idea that emphasizes the ability to examine how inputs are transformed into outputs and to assess the underlying mechanism. We know that transparency in large language models faces unique challenges that go beyond traditional notions. So it's important to note that we can have some specific features related to transparency in AI elements. For example, the first feature, we can call it epistemic capacity in data sources. We know, obviously, that LLMs are trained on large data sets, which are often publicly available. In this sense, the opacity regards data provenance. In particular, we can have some issues related to ethics and the legal context concerning these data sets. So in this case, transparency, in my opinion, should involve mechanisms to trace and verify the origin, quality, and the potential biases of training data. We can have this example in which recent research advocates for data sheets or provenance audits, which can provide metadata or dataset construction. This way to address transparency focuses on algorithmic clarity, and in this vein, such as approach emphasizes the need to make the data pipeline visible and accountable. So the focus is shifted from the mechanism, so to say, through which data are processed, and we need to take into consideration the way data are taken in the first place and then used in the process. Another feature we can consider is the so-called algorithmic transparencies versus interpretability. In this case, we know that in classical terms, algorithmic transparency entails providing access to a system architecture and operational rules. However, in LLMs, we have a very great complexity, and so it is possible that the concept of raw transparency could be insufficient. If it is the case, transparency should prioritize functional interpretability. In this way, enabling non-expert stakeholders to grasp the behavior patterns of models through real-world example and also some kind of demonstrations, rather than requiring considering specific technical aspects. So the point is, it is quite impossible for a non-expert to understand the algorithmic transparency in a good way, but we can resort to another way to consider transparency, which is the capacity to understand the general functioning of the system, and then we can also consider the idea of weaknesses of the system in a way that we can have a good grasping of the general application of LLMs. But we can also consider some criticism to this idea of transparency as a very important principle concerning the ethics of generative AI. In this way, we can consider what some people involved in the field are stating nowadays. For example, some argue that the full transparency is very difficult to be accomplished, and it is also, in their view, counterproductive. Why? because users do not necessarily need to understand every detail of the system. And it is possible that an excessive focus on technical transparency burdens users with information overload. This is a possibility, and again, advocates of this view think that we can use the concept of pragmatic trust built through different mechanisms. And finally, for some stakeholders, transparency threatens competitive advantage, and also exposing sensitive technical details and increasing the risk of misuse by malicious actors. In this sense, this is not only to defend intellectual property over the system and thus maintain the competitive advantage, but in this view, it is also to protect society from potential misuse of very powerful systems by those with known positive intention for society. On the other hand, one could argue, who guarantees that the creators themselves, as a profit-oriented private company, will always be committed to the best use of a tool that only they will know how to use? So I agree that the critics can have a good point in underlying that transparency is not always a very important concept in the classical way, but we need to be cautious in discarding the idea of transparency, because I think it's a very relevant point we need to take into consideration. And then the second feature, the second principle I want to consider, which is fairness. In the classic sense, fairness in the computational system is understood as the absence of bias or discrimination, ensuring that outputs do not disadvantage particular groups. We know that this is, can happen in particular with race, gender, or socioeconomic status. In general, bias mitigation remains critical, but fairness seems to demand a broader approach in a way. And in particular, we can consider the idea of context-sensitive fairness, because in general, classical fairness assumes a universal standard, and it can be controversial, you know. However, fairness in LLMs is inherently contextual, shaped by the norms, values, and priorities of specific user groups, of cultures, and tradition. So this is a point we need to take into consideration when addressing the issue of fairness. For instance, a system, generative AI system, deployed in multilingual context should balance linguistic fairness with cultural sensitivity, avoiding, if possible, imposing hegemonic norms through its outputs. So this is an example where we can consider this more nuanced approach to fairness. And again, this requires models to adapt in a dynamic way to diverse normative frameworks. Sometimes, you know, people prefer the simpler approach based on the idea of one-size-fits-all solution, but obviously we need to be capable of adapt. the model application to different contexts. And again, it's important to have a fair representation in training data. Again, classical fairness emphasizes bias reduction within algorithms. However, fairness in these specific kinds of systems begins with the composition of training datasets. So it's important not to tokenize underrepresented groups, treating diversity as a checkbox exercise. It means that current approaches often reduce underrepresented groups to mere categories of symbols, in a way, approaching diversity in a superficial way, as if it were a simple test to check off, rather than fostering inclusivity. So this is a specific point worth considering. And finally, concerning fairness, we can have the idea of impact-oriented fairness. We know that classical discussion focus on the system's internal mechanism, but recent approaches highlight the need to assess downstream impacts of this kind of systems, and in particular in specific areas like hiring or legal decision-making. And we know that in this specific context, typically women and ethnic minorities are underrepresented or unfairly judged. So we need to avoid this outcome, and a way to do that is exactly consider how LLMs can impact on these processes. So longitudinal studies in this sense can track these impacts in real-world context, and we can try to mitigate these consequences, reframing fairness as a question of societal outcomes, not just system inputs alone. But again, we can and we should, I think, consider some criticism to the idea of fairness in generative AI. In particular, fairness can be a contested concept. We know that in a pluralistic world, there is no universally accepted definition of fairness. Obviously, we can have some definition which are shared by the intellectual community and by experts, but not from all the people in different cultures. So balancing distributive justice with practical efficiency, for example, often involves trade-offs that render absolute, so to say, fairness unattainable. So obviously, every principle in ethics is in a way unattainable in the sense that we are in a imperfect world, and so every principle cannot be realized in a perfect way. But the point here is not the general view about ethics, but the specific feasibility of fairness in this kind of systems. So critics of the fairness imperative in this sense contend that emphasizing equity introduce unnecessary complexity into systems because they think that this system can work in a simpler way without this subtleties of ethical considerations. Another point which can be partly shared is that ensuring fairness in LLMs often entails normalizing cultural and linguistic differences. So in this way, potentially erasing valuable diversity. But I think that this idea of cultural flattening based on the excessive focus of fairness can be questionable in my view, because obviously we need a certain degree of fairness in every context. So my point is that fairness should be defended and introduced in the generative AI ethics. And finally, we can consider the principle of responsibility and also accountability. In general, this concept refers to the attribution of liability for a system action or output. And in this case, we need to single out the legal and ethical accountability of developers or operators for all the harms caused by the systems. And in the context we are talking about today, responsibility extends beyond traditional boundaries. So probably we need a more complex approach to that. And in this sense, we can talk about distributed accountability, because we know classical frameworks try to identify a singular responsible actor. However, we are witnessing a more complex impact of LLMs and our activities. So we have different actors, from data curators, model trainers to downstream users. It is important to stress that users can be as responsible as other actors in the process. So in this sense, we need a broader consideration of accountability. In this sense, accountability it becomes a distributed model. And in this line, emerging governance proposals advocate for multi-stakeholder oversight bodies. So we can have different kinds of experts involved in the process of control and regulate the field. And then a specific feature of responsibility is what's called dynamic responsibility in adaptable models. Unlike static systems, we know LLMs are adaptable through fine-tuning or in context learning. And so the idea of accountability becomes more and more complicated to assess. In this sense, a model fine-tuned by a third party for a specific application may generate outputs inconsistent with original purpose. And so we know that we have many new LLMs oriented to specific goals and specific contexts. So it's very difficult to have a general rule for evaluating responsibility. And to address this, it's proposed to implement traceability protocols, obviously something not easy to do, ensuring that any modifications are documented and attributable to specific entities. that it implies that responsibility becomes a dynamic framework, not just a static model. In autonomous system, moral responsibility can change further. In general, classical responsibility assumes a direct relationship between human operators and system outputs, but we know that LLMs take on increasingly autonomous roles, and so we have new questions about their legal status. And so far, obviously, generative AI system cannot bear moral responsibility, but they are moral amplifiers, so to say. And in this sense, we can think of a proactive ethical design to ensure that models align with our values and do not perpetuate harm or discrimination, as we have seen before. And also in this sense, sorry, I have a bad flu. A criticism to this strict idea of responsibility comes from the idea of the difficulties to apply it and the potential paternalistic component of this idea of responsibility. So some critics highlight how this idea of distributed accountability can lead to diluted responsibility, where no single actor bears clear liability. Obviously, this can be specifically problematic in case of harm. And the second point is that a libertarian perspective is in favor of the development of new technologies with a minimal burden of ethical issues and regulatory constraints. This view is based on the idea that markets and society will naturally adapt to new technologies. So we do not need, let I say, rules of responsibility, on transparency, because people should be free to make what they think is the right thing, and the state or different groups are not entitled to impose on them specific constraints. So this is a libertarian view, which again is a questionable view in this perspective, because we know how generative AI can be powerful, and then I think we need to have some rules in action. I can skip this. It's about a very interesting new study. Just a word on that, because it's quite interesting. Probably some of you knows about this study just published in archive, not a peer-reviewed paper, but it's quite astonishing that researchers managed to have 1,000 people participating in 2-hour interviews with an AI system, and based on the conversation, the team was able to create simulation agents that replicated each participant's value and preferences with great accuracy. this is quite also in a way a fact that can have bad outcomes. In a way, we know that these AI models are designed to be used for experiments only, but if a system can, in a way, reproduce all our psychological features with this simple procedure, now we have a new big issues to be considered from an ethical point of view. So this is just one study. We cannot extrapolate the specific consequences, but I think we need to raise a red flag in order to address this potential issue. And so finally, we can have an overview of what we have said so far. In my view, transparency, fairness, and responsibility remain foundational to the ethical development of AI generative system. However, addressing these principles requires moving beyond classical definitions to embrace what we can call a reflexive ethics that evolves alongside technological advancement. Reflexive in this way, it means an ethics that is not established and then cannot change, but an ethics which is the product of different perspective shared and with the attention to be updated according to technological advancements. And by foregrounding contextual adaptability, inclusivity, and shared accountability, I think we can ensure that LLMs are not only technically robust, but also aligned with diverse human values and equitable societal outcomes. So if we can implement in a proper way these principles, we can have better systems which are not against our values, but can help us having them in a good shape and align and set with all our ideals of progress and flourishing in society. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I think before we allow the audience to ask some questions, I would like to ask you one question, which is basically which builds on your conclusion, just trying to make it more explicit. So, which philosophical approach or ethical theory do you think would best serve this consideration you were making? I'm thinking in general terms: virtue ethics, Kantian ethics, consequentialism. This is a general question, mostly for students. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. Obviously, when, as I did introduce some principles, in general, you are in the field of a deontological approach, because principles are what drive the deontology as a meta-ethical framework. But obviously, I, in this case, advocate a mixed, if we can say that, a mixed system, which combines both some principles which are part of a deontological approach with a potential development of virtue ethics, which is based on the capacity of people to have good dispositions and in a way that they are capable of aligning with new technologies and in this way preserving their values. So I know it's not easy to combine these two approaches, but I think this is a feasible way worth considering.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. I agree with that. Maybe one follow-up on transparency. I think when tackling the issue of transparency, we also need to look not just at LLMs, but also on the application on which they rely. Because especially now, in the context of increasing integration between LLM and, for instance, engines, browsers, the transparency of the LLM depends on the transparency on the browsers, so that is combined with it. So that is also important. So maybe what we should do is to push for open access, more open access, which means direct control. And this is just a point. Was wondering if you agree with this.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So questions. Couple of questions, maybe.
Could you hear me?
Yes, please go
Yes, I have a question. Hello, Professor Lawatza. I'm a doctoral student in Xiamen University. So I have a question about the transparency you mentioned. I read some papers about epistemology on AI, ethics on AI, and most researchers regard the transparency of AI is so important. But I really don't understand it. Is it a kind of anthropocentrism to requiring the AI with complete transparency? As even the human expert could not make so clear demonstration for their decision. Sometimes human experts rely on intuitions. It is hard to explain why they do this decision. It's that, yes, I have intuition about that. So why we should ask the AI should offer so strong or so complete transparency? Why we shouldn't just believe, oh, this is a reliable machine? Just like engine of cars or engine of airplane. Yes, we couldn't make a clear description about how the gas or how the gasoline burn in this system. If we pair it from a molecule perspective, it's hard to make a clear description. But we believe it is a really reliable machine. So
grazie. Yes, thank you for okay, thank you for your question. Yeah, this is a very fascinating perspective, not just relying on our human-based idea of transparency and letting machines work in their way, so to say. Yeah, I think it's something worth thinking about. Yeah, but in general, I agree. Machines have a logic of their own, and they can be explained on that basis. Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, I need to leave because people are waiting for me.
That's okay, Andrea. No worries. So thank you very much for your time, for your talk. And yes, we thank you and we wish you a good day. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye. Thank you.